innovation reports and 150,000 supporting examples and data points. PSFK IQ, where innovators turn for research.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of Retail 2042. This conference is part of a series of events that fall under the umbrella of the Retail Innovation Week 2022. And these events discuss topics that are driving the future of retail. For this event especially, we are going to look out a little bit further. We're going to look beyond the horizon, and we're going to try to look at the themes and ideas that are developing out into the future. And we're also going to talk about what that means for us today and our roadmaps. We're going to talk about two key themes. We're going to talk about the Omni Consumer, and we're going to talk about the on-demand brand. We're going to turn to research to try to understand those topics better, and then we will have expert conversations. So the Future of Retail Conference is always based on the findings of PSFK's Future of Retail report each year, and this year there's no change there. So Scott Lachut, who's part of PSFK, has put together a fantastic and insightful report which can be downloaded around the Future of Retail 2042. And he's going to take us through that first section, the Omni Consumer section, right now to help us understand what his analysts were talking about. Scott.
Every year we do a Future of Retail report. This year we are taking a bit more of a speculative approach and looking 21 years into the future to try to forecast what the environment will look like for brands and retailers, for the consumer, as well as supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, all of those supporting services within the retail environment. As we looked at that, as we looked at the research, we tried to establish what we called future retail truths, which we think will come to define the landscape in 2042. We took a look at a lot of the technologies that were shaping the market today and tried to tease those out in terms of some of the big shifts that will enable for, again, both consumers and businesses. We talk about things like digital twins now, which primarily kind of exist within the manufacturing space and maybe the automotive space, and thinking about what that means when every product has a digital twin that exists in the virtual world, both as we think about the metaverse, but then also thinking about the touch points that creates between consumers and businesses. We talk about the idea of AI and what that means when we each essentially have a personalized AI assistant that does a number of things in our lives, but then potentially even does our shopping for us, finding the best deals, personalizing things, etc. Talking about the notion of products as assets. So this idea that anything that I or you or anyone listening in may own has value associated with it. We see that with the resale marketplace sort of burgeoning up around sneakers and luxury items and NFTs and all of these things, but that sort of idea of the stock market being sort of broadcast against anything we own, and the ability to sort of sell and exchange those with others fluidly within the market. And then talking about things like on-demand delivery and as we get closer to the consumer, both physically and in terms of time, what that ultimately looks like, as well as the manufacturing that sort of supports all of this, as that potentially gets smaller, more bespoke, and ultimately can make one products and have those to the consumer very rapidly. I'll stop there and just sort of highlight those, and then talk through very quickly the three themes. So the way that we've kind of shaped this report is to sort of take those retail truths and position them in the context of a 2042 marketplace where we see these sort of three big themes shaping. One being the meta mall, two being the omni consumer, and then three being what we're calling the on-demand brand. Hyphens factor in very appropriately within 2042, apparently. But let me sort of take you through each of those one by one here. So this idea of the meta mall, I think we're all sort of steeped in this, all the conversations that are happening right now around the metaverse, whether that's Facebook sort of positioning itself, moving from a social media network into a metaverse company and what that potentially means. There's a lot that's happening right now in the sort of broader landscape. For us, I think we're looking at the hybrid way that consumers live today and businesses live today. By virtue of the fact that we all have mobile phones in our pockets, we're sort of always straddling the physical and digital worlds. And that obviously is something that has been happening slowly within the retail marketplace. At the same time, we see social media and gaming having become these sort of mainstream platforms that are now reaching much wider audiences. And imagining what that looks like when those two worlds merge in many ways, and then put commerce, a layer of commerce within that. So in a virtual context, you have the mall essentially existing in an immersive online world where you can buy both digital and potentially physical goods that you get delivered to your home, as well as sort of thinking about the digital layer that pervasively can exist on top of the physical world. And so we see things like AR being the sort of leading indicator of this, but all of these conversations right now thinking about what wearable AR might look like and what that might mean for the world going forward, and being able to seamlessly access that within a physical store, within the physical world, and what that ultimately can mean in terms of how we shop and interact. The second idea for us is what we're calling the Omni Consumer. And really for us, this is an evolution of what we might already be thinking about in terms of the empowered consumer. The recognition that consumers have much more agency within the marketplace today. They have much more say and power in terms of their interactions with brands. They also have much higher expectations in terms of what they want from brands, what they want to see from brands as well. And so as we think about 2042, we see that consumers are not just consumers anymore. They're CEOs and creative directors of their own brands by virtue of the fact that they can now reach audiences, whether big or small, through social media. They can sell influence, they can sell their content, and more what we're starting to see is that they can also sell products. For us, that's on behalf of other brands. So this idea of affiliate marketing sort of being available to anyone. Resale marketplace, as I already mentioned at the jump, we have this sort of burgeoning resale market, which is now peer-to-peer and seemingly is existing in so many different phases. And then what we're starting to see is the leading edges of the creator economy sort of pushing into product development and new services, whether that's new manufacturing services, new e-commerce services, new finance services that enable people to take that influence and start selling products of their own design to others in the market. And so that's really exciting. It creates an opportunity for there to be so many more brands than exist today, and sort of changes the conversation about what a brand might be.
Okay, that was super interesting to understand this omni consumer, this all-powerful, all-knowing consumer. Let's talk to our experts. Let's see what they think about some of the ideas that Scott's been talking about, and also talk about what the implications are for today and for the near future. Let's look at who's speaking on the next session.
For the first session at our Future of Retail 2042 conference,
We will explore the topic of the Omni Consumer. On this expert panel, we have Josh Shabtai, Senior Director of Lowe's Companies Innovation Labs. He leads a global team using emerging technology to build what's next for home improvement retail. Also joining us is Mitch Joel, is a passionate public speaker, author, digital visionary, and the founder of advisory, investing and publishing company 6 Pixels. Natasha Jakubowski is Managing Partner and Chief Innovation Officer at Anomaly, an ad age agency of the year company. And finally, Stephanie Benedetto is the founder of the innovative sustainable online marketplace Queen of Raw. And if you're watching live, a number of the speakers will be engaging with the audience using the interactive chat, ask questions and make comments throughout the event. Now, let's join the moderator Scott Lachut from PSFK to start this session.
So Mitch, Natasha, Stephanie, Josh, thank you all for joining today. Excited to be chatting about all things Omni Consumer, which for us at PSFK is really talking about the empowered consumer and their role in the marketplace today. Obviously, this has been something that has been discussed for many years now. We see things like social media and mobile are sort of 2 big inflection points in terms of giving those consumers more power within the marketplace, but there's a lot of other things that have changed, particularly over the past 2 years or so. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts in terms of what you see as the empowered consumer and things that kind of define them in today's marketplace. And so maybe Mitch, you can start us out. I'm interested in things like their behaviors or expectations that they have for the companies that they're interacting with.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that, we're going to dive straight into COVID, obviously, because what I think happened during this moment in time is not what we're hearing in the general patter of the industry. General pattern of the industry is, wow, look how fast technology works. Look how quickly innovation is moving to more self-empowered consumers. And I think 2 things really fundamentally happen that will amplify your question. One is amplification. I believe that every retailer, from the smallest independent retailer on the corner to the massive conglomerates and multinational brands that Josh can talk about in terms of Lowe's would be a great example, really heard and had to react to the reality of the world, which forced the digitization to happen in that more amplified way. Like, we're now hearing it and we have to do it. So if they were lagging in things like curbside pickup at national scales, they really had to ramp that up and figure it out. Online delivery, free pickup, things like that. If you move it down to the local retailer who thought, well, why would I ever need an e-commerce function? Suddenly they were taking orders by phone and by email and quickly realized we should probably do a Shopify at this moment in time. So you really had that amplification drive through. And I think the other component that's creating this empowerment is distribution. So now what we had because of the pandemic is our youngest of young, if you were lucky enough to have online learning, that are suddenly really digitally savvy and connected. And then the other side, we had our eldest of elderly, where we were sliding iPads under the door so we could FaceTime with them, but then also teach them how to do online ordering because of just how the pandemic evolved. Now that creates what I call this great compression, right? This moment in time where you really have B2B, B2C, small, medium, and large, national, multinational, local, all really thinking about this. And then you have that distribution model where all of the consumers from the various types of industries are there and active. So now we have a reaction to it. I called it forced innovation. And through this forced innovation, people figuring out things like curbside pickup, free delivery. What are the other things we could digitize? Are there digitized products? We're looking at GameStop now, talking about getting into NFTs and things like that. And so what I think has happened is that power has gone back. I mean, even if we think about transactions in Canada, where I live, contactless transactions have been here for a while, the sort of tapping of the phone, but it became very pervasive in the States right away. And what was experiential to go to the Apple store became extremely transactional. And so when you talk about that empowered consumer, typically online, it was a more transactional experience that has become more experiential because online was driving so much. And then the physical retail, which was typically experiential, has become that much more transactional. And so it's all of those things that offer this amazing power to the consumer. The real question to me is, will it continue? Will retailers go back to their old tried and true ways and remove these things that they were forced to do that actually created new opportunities? Or will they scale up to that consumer demand and want? And to me, that's the area of both friction and opportunity that I think is so powerful, but clearly driven by the fact that consumers got it. And so if we're going to look at one silver lining here in the chaos that is the retail world during a pandemic, it's that the opportunity to be digital first, to truly create that omni-channel has never been more present.
Mitch, it's kind of interesting that you said that, you're wondering whether post-pandemic we're going to see a shift back to the way things were. But I think it's interesting, the latest McKinsey report, I think, showed that at least 6 out of 10 shoppers are using at least one digital channel in their shopping journey, especially for an apparel garment. And I think that has major implications for what was traditionally, right? We know only brick and mortar stores. So are they going to go back? I don't know. They have to meet their consumers where they are, right? And especially if it means they can meet more consumers and those consumers are going to spend more dollars, that becomes the consumers that they want and need, right? So that they can not only survive what's going on in the world today, but truly thrive. And so that combination of online and offline, I don't know that I think post-pandemic it's going to change. The other thing I think is really interesting is we talk about them, and Scott, you kind of laid out that this is the Omni Consumer, and that word Omni has so many interesting implications for what that consumer is and their behavior. One is omnipresent. They're obviously everywhere, all over, across all channels, everywhere in the world in real time, right? Instantly from your phone. But it's also omniscient, right? They can know so much information at their fingertips about these products from farm to finished good to end of life and around again. And so I think that also has really interesting implications for how we communicate these products and the track and trace, the trust, the transparency, the sustainability that is such a critical part of the storytelling today.
I tag on to that it needs to really become actionalized within it. So like I'll talk about curbside pickup, which was lagging in Canada versus places like the US. So it gets deployed and I'm now suddenly a more promiscuous customer going to different types of retailers. And my experience has been, day one, you park in spot 3, you call the number, someone comes out with gloves and masks and drops it in your trunk. A week and a half later, you're dialing and dialing at that spot and no one's answering the phone. 3 weeks later, you're dialing and someone picks up the phone frustratingly says, we don't do that anymore. Can you just come in and pick up your goods? So I think you're right in terms of we want to do this philosophically as a brand, but in terms of real execution and built into the DNA of these retailers, sometimes those habits are hard to break. So I agree with you. I just wonder if they are going to really operationalize it.
Well, Josh, maybe you can speak to that specifically, because I know that that was something that Lowe's had to do sort of out of necessity, and ensuring that that was a great experience for shoppers.
Yeah. And my position on all these things, we're not going back. I think customers have grown, accustomed to really their step change innovations, right? That are just starting to take friction out of the shopping experience itself. I don't see a future in which folks go back and ask for more friction, in their shopping experience. I think this accelerated that. Where we're starting to, explore further, and particularly from the Lowe's Innovation Lab standpoint, is how does the democratization of other emerging technologies amongst our customers actually start to take wilder friction out of the overall experience. And so we're looking at areas, for example, like the LiDAR sensors that are, now embedded in the back of all iPhone 12 and 13 Pros, right? Enables you to actually start to get a more accurate scan of the actual space in which you shop, right? We're looking at a future in which the next generation of all these things, we can completely take the friction out of shopping by letting you do the entire thing in your space, size to the actual place where you're at, things like that. So I think that the trick now is we've got customers who expect the curbside pickup. They expect being able to buy online, pick up in store within an hour. They're, supply chain constraints notwithstanding, they still expect to be able to shop digitally and get what they want very quickly. We're trying to actually blow past that
Yeah.
and shift the expectations. Use this as an opportunity to shift them even more wildly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting going from taking the friction out to actually then enhancing how people shop and thinking about the consumer journey completely differently, and I think the opportunities are so interesting in terms of going past and thinking about how do you start bringing in entertainment? How do you start bringing in inspiration? How do you start creating something that actually is more than just shopping? And I think that's the interesting thing moving forward.
Josh, I'm curious though, when you say things like that, where does an organization really think about that? Because ultimately you're still dealing with a very large foot plan. You're dealing with a factor of expense against revenue that is driven by per square foot. Historically in that industry, the pattern is you could walk for miles and not find someone to help you find your stuff. So when you're thinking about that type of what you call step change innovation, or that bigger leap in innovation, how does the organization really feel about it in a world where like even digital signage is almost too expensive to deploy type of thing?
I mean, there are a number of different ways to look at it. I mean, again, I think at the crux, and I'm oversimplifying it here, but home improvement is, amongst one of the most complex retail categories. There's you've got 60, 70 different stores wrapped into one. In terms of your supply chain, you're covering everything from refrigerators to lumber to live goods. Friction and complexity is the name of the game. At the core, whatever we can do to optimize how we use our retail locations, how we can actually enable our customers to do more before they even get to the store, makes us more efficient and more adept, I guess, at pulling the friction out. I don't know, Mitch. Yeah, I could go deeper in a specific area. It's funny. I want to tackle the whole world at the same time, but yeah.
I think, Mitch, to what you were asking about, and it's important, right? The unit economics matter. How do we make these incredible innovations and technologies and tools that companies like mine are building for enterprise and beyond to use quick, easy, cost-effective, right? And one of the opportunities we saw as a business was that we could build great marketplaces, help businesses buy and sell their waste today, and help businesses take the money that they're actually making. This is found money, and then put it back into doing good work into the supply chain, right? Then you can digitally innovate, pay your workers more, reach your consumers in more personalized new ways. And your overall CapEx expenditure doesn't even go up. I mean, one of our Fortune 500 customers saw recouped up to 15% of their bottom line this year, just by finding and selling unused inventory. And then by putting it back into their supply chain, digitally innovating, doing all this good work, they actually saw 3 times the conversion rate in their online direct-to-consumer business, just by talking about the good work they were doing. And it was quick and easy for them, right? With our software, they can actually measure their impact, and any customer can scan a QR code at point of purchase and literally see the amount of water, toxins, carbon emissions, waste, and the journey and the story of that product at point of purchase. And I think that's where a lot of the work with machine learning, AI, blockchain, and all these incredible new technologies and tools, well, some new, some applications new and growing, really help them do that quickly, easily, and cost effectively. And that's what I'm excited about.
Well, I'm to steer the conversation a little bit. I mean, there's obviously been some amazing things that have been discussed, and I love this idea of Omni being sort of everywhere in this kind of distributed marketplace that brands now exist in, and obviously consumers are shopping in, and then the sort of omniscient piece, specifically around how consumers are utilizing those tools and learning more about the things they're buying, who they're buying from, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious from the standpoint of a consumer in the marketplace now being a partner or collaborator for brands, if you will. So sort of moving away from just being purely consumers, but being marketers, sellers. advocates, all of these things. And from the standpoint of how brands kind of cultivate those relationships, I wonder if anyone has any specific thoughts on brands that are doing it well, what that sort of means in terms of how that shapes the marketplace going forward. I know it's kind of a broad question, but I'm sort of curious to know the consumer beyond being a consumer and what that means.
Well, I think you kind of started this entire conversation talking about the power of social media and mobile, right? And it literally means that everyone with a phone in their pocket is some form, some more successful than others, right, of an influencer, a marketer, a buyer, a seller. And it means they can provide real-time feedback and insights on products and goods. I think they do this because the omni-channel consumer loves innovation, right? They want to experiment with new technologies, new engagement models. I think one of the most interesting platforms that's kind of supporting that shift and that we kind of have to talk about is TikTok, right? I mean, with over 1 billion monthly active users now, it's literally the world's biggest and most active mall. And I think it's totally riding and fueling the pandemic and this in at home shopping experience, that hashtag TikTok made me buy it. So I think the companies that really get it right, who are leveraging TikTok and people to authentically tell the story of these products, why they like it, why they bought it. I mean, that's the most powerful, I think, engagement a brand can get. And that loyalty really gets amplified across platforms like that.
I've been very, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Natasha.
I've been very impressed by someone like a Walmart, this massive, retailer doing really harnessing TikTok and influencers and with my local social, again, kind of helping all of their employees really take a kind of, consumer forward position and start using their employees to actually become influencers. And I think that's super interesting. It's definitely hard to ignore TikTok, but I also think it's interesting thinking about how brands are cultivating communities more. So whether it's their employee communities or it's literally creating online communities for that give use and almost create a club or membership or rewards program like the Additive Creators Club or Seventh Generation, helping new parents think about products and how to help each other. So I think both on the employee side and on the consumer side, how people kind of harness these communities and create communities and
I believe that I think there's a certain altruism to this. If you go back in my work to the early 2000s, I was definitely the person with the pom-poms cheering on exactly what Stephanie and Natasha are saying. And there's no doubt that when I look at my TikTok feed or my Instagram feed, I'm always marveled at how well they are targeting me with things in which I would like to buy. But the reality of it is it's becoming very, very saturated. The reality of it is even the way that TikTok maybe by it has been abducted by affiliate marketers as a way to really essentially not really talk about what they love, but there's a back end to it with very, very little transparency based off of where TikTok is based and how they operate, which is in and of itself a story in terms of China and how that's operating. What I think is very, very opportunistic in that world of saturation and lack of transparency. And I do think things like the FTC will be coming in and whatever the governing body is in Canada to do some more regulations around this, because we just can't have every TikToker running wild, selling whatever they want in a non-transparent way. One of the areas where I see this really blossoming is an app called Whatnot. I think Whatnot is a great example of how to do it well, which is you have subject matter experts who also have a business. So in my case, I'm a bit of a comic book nerd and graphic novel nerd. And to watch these experts come on and not just do online auctions and online selling live, which is, Whatnot is essentially the shopping network of the future. But the knowledge and community and chatter and chat that happens back and forth is really unparalleled. And it works in a way because it's very transparent. You know that these are transactional channels or shows that you are logging into. And so the opportunity of leveraging that from small businesses to large And what I mean by that is really focusing on the depth of it. You know, Josh is talking about your home building. Home building is B2B, it's B2C, it's people who just want to maybe decorate in a better way, but don't want to build. Then there's the home DIY. All of those become these very powerful depths of verticals that you can leverage in these platforms to create content, to create community, and obviously to do commerce. My challenge with the whole social shopping currently is really just the lack of transparency. And you see it if you have a keen and astute eye. And what it leads to is a greater conversation of even what we're dealing with in misinformation on Facebook and whatever it is that we don't have a very media literate and or a retail literate customer. And there's going to have to be something in between that in terms of protectionism. Look at things like, you know, if you look for a webcam on Amazon, it's like, who are all these brands? Who are all these things that have millions of reviews and great 5-star ratings? That is coming to a head. And I believe the antidote to it is things like Whatnot and these subject matter experts who also happen to be micro retailers.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Amazon, right? I mean, obviously, it's a powerful search and discovery vehicle with huge volume of people and buyers and sellers and information and data. But I keep following and reading some of the research showing how many people actually do their search and discovery there, but then go leave, right? Go do additional research, want to find out more information. And I think that's been growing and growing, Mitch, to your point and what you're saying, right? And I think that, yeah, trust, transparency, that kind of information, knowing about your products, it matters. And it matters to today's, especially the millennial and Gen Z consumers, right? More than ever. It's a top 3 criteria and priority of helping them and of helping them make that purchase decision. And the good news is I do believe, and obviously it's my business, that companies are getting stronger and stronger on how they communicate and measure this impact and the true story of where these products are made, where they come from, who they go to. One of the movements that I think is fueling this is the resale movement, right? You literally have buyers become sellers, sellers become buyers, stories becoming more transparent around sustainability. And this is companies like ThredUp, The RealReal, Poshmark, Depop, StockX. And the good news is that brands get more and more, obviously, economic opportunity to engage in this while also needing to be more transparent and trustworthy. And so regulation, as you mentioned, definitely plays a part in it. The laws are changing, right? We're part of it in the New York Circular City Initiative with H&M and others, but I think consumers are also demanding it. So the future is bright for that.
Yeah, I love this idea about trust within the context of these kind of marketplaces, because I think it gets left out often. And, you know, again, I think the parallel with like an Instagram or a TikTok and an Amazon are very sort of apt. And then thinking about Whatnot, which I was not familiar with, Mitch, but where there's a level of curation and expertise that's sort of built into that, which I think is quite interesting. I want to just kind of keep diving in, and I mean, this was something that I wanted to follow up on that Stephanie mentioned as well. You kind of listed off a bunch of technologies that you were sort of interested in and thought had sort of benefits for businesses and consumers sort of moving forward. I think you already touched on this a little bit when you mentioned LiDAR, Josh, but I wonder, what are some of the things that you have particularly have your eye on as you guys are thinking about sort of 2022 and beyond in terms of technologies that you feel kind of move the needle for Lowe's or beyond?
Yeah, the area, from a technology standpoint that's been all consuming for me, has really been rooted, advances in computer vision and really understanding those spaces. I think, part of it is being a product, we're all products now, the COVID age. Our homes have become our daycares, they become our schools, they're the places. This is a room I see, more than I see my family. I'm like in it like 16 hours a day. So our relationship to our homes are very different. Looking at LiDAR as a gateway to understanding these spaces and starting to serve different kinds of experiences that are personalized, that actually bring service into the home in some new ways is really big for us. And it starts to create the data needed to start training computer vision for this to be democratized much more widely. We talk a lot about at Labs moving into a future of spatial commerce, in which the home itself becomes the canvas for an embodied shopping and service experience, in which you're going to be able to design different spaces in real time. But we see a really interesting future in which much commerce is going to happen, at home. It's going to happen in these spaces and service. Another area that I'm looking at quite a bit is advances in additive manufacturing, right? And when we talk about empowerment and we talk about how manufacturing can shift, there's a future we'd like to build in which, a retailer can hold zero inventory in some of the categories that are low turn and things like that. We're seeing some really interesting advances in metal, wood, additive manufacturing that could enable the ability to design, produce locally, design anywhere, produce locally, use stores as a manufacturing hub. There's some really interesting things happening in that space. So,
Josh, I love that you mentioned that. I do think that we're seeing post-COVID, the future supply chain is one that is more on demand, more local, right? More digital, more sustainable. That's great for supply chains and businesses to be more efficient and quick and iterative, but it's also great for consumers who get locally made, personalized, on-demand things. So it's kind of a win-win-win. And how do you say no to that? One interesting thing I think that also has given rise to through the pandemic, which everyone seems to be getting into today, is obviously Web 3.0, right? The metaverse, companies like Nike literally buying digital sneaker brands. And I'm excited to see and curious how we combine the metaverse and the digital world with the physical world, especially when it comes to creators, because typically, we've been excited about in the metaverse, people purchasing creative works and NFTs. But as you kind of mentioned, Josh, what about the creative process itself? That is that 3D design, gaming, future regulation will be interesting here, which I know Mitch already talked a little bit about, but I think that's something that we're just at the beginning of seeing what's possible.
Yeah, and the truth is, retailers have been very, very slow in adopting the opportunity behind digital goods. You can go back in time and think about electronic departments within a major department store like a Macy's offering their own version of a Netflix, even if they're partnered with Netflix, as a way to supplement or augment a sale. So you could buy this TV and get our special version of Netflix for X amount. The opportunity of just virtual goods in general within fashion retailers. So hearing stories about Nike doing this and NFTs, I'm often looking at these as, are they more than press releases? Are they more than statements of first, planting the flag as being first? Or are these actual business models that are reflective of a retailer who is both understanding where the world is at and potentially where it's going? Now, if we're going to say that it's the latter and that they truly mean it, the investment to do it is going to be more substantial than they think. And I'm going to go back to my 20 plus years in digital and tell you that we would sit down with large retailers and talk about their first e-commerce or website platform in the early 2000s. And the thought of paying for that, what would be the equivalent of building one store, was absurd to them. It just didn't, the infrastructure really wasn't there, and the ability to support it wasn't there. And here we find ourselves 2 decades later, and even through the pandemic, looking at the penetration of digital commerce in comparison to physical retail, we're still not really there. We're not going to go back to a sub 10% room here. We're going to hopefully stay in the 20s and 30s where we thought we'd hit by 2030. But that is just really, we're in the amoeba stage of things. We're not in the sophisticated branded marketing retail phase. So, I'm not surprised. Nike said for years, we're a technology company, not a sporting good company. We've heard all the patter of it, but to really embrace something like NFTs, let's talk about NFTs. Fine. How many of them are just accepting crypto at this point? And the answer is, it would be very difficult to even do just that. So on the side of the consumer, I think we've had a very dynamic conversation, but when we actually get down to the brass tacks of retailers' abilities to truly be digitized in a way in which consumers have become accustomed to it, I think the chasm is much, much wider than us in our current roles, right? We're here to promote and talk about all the great things you can do. I think we are far, far ways away from that, only because to staff it, to build it, to deploy it will take a certain level of not only scale, but real transformational change within the organization that, again, the vast majority of retailers didn't do this stuff that we've seen in the past 2 years because they wanted to. They did it because they were forced to. And the question will become, will they maintain that as a strong, viable way of operating. And again, we say, oh, we're there forever change. We'll see. Like, I just don't know that the jury is out on that. I haven't seen it in actual practice. In fact, when things have opened up, they've subsequently closed because we're dealing with waves. It seemed like they were going backwards and not really embracing it as a new way. It seemed like the stuff they had to do to maintain their business during these trying times was almost too much of an effort, almost broke them. And so we'll see going forward if they really are forever change. I hope so. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm actually a very optimistic person, but we have to see because the investment is very significant now.
It is, but I think it's also been interesting to watch through the pandemic who dominated in value creation. Number one, Nike, right? Who else is on that list? LVMH, Kering, Richemont, H&M, I mean, the ones who are thinking about the future, digitally innovating, meeting their consumers where they are. Now, will they continue to dominate in value creation? That's obviously what we're going to see. We can't predict the future, but that's what's shown. And they're the ones who are thinking about innovation, sustainability.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, yeah.
And I think it's interesting looking at young people. Like when I think of literally, like my daughter is 9 and she is it's so normal for her to earn to play, play to earn, and basically start trading and creating digital products with her friends, with people she doesn't know. I do think there's a difference between, big companies getting into it and making it a business right now and thinking about it as a route to learning how to meet consumers where they're going. I think there's, NFTs as a marketing vehicle versus a kind of profit center is something that I think a lot of retailers are starting to think about. It's not necessarily about creating revenue, it's about engaging consumers, rewarding consumers, keeping them part of their ecosystem, meeting them along the consumer journey in different new ways. And I think more and more, people under 18 are starting to think of this as pretty normal. So whether it's a traditional retailer, it's some, amazing platform that we haven't necessarily heard of or created yet, I think it's going to happen, not necessarily in the way we expect, but I think this is going to happen in terms of value creation.
And it is happening too. I mean, if we can't dismiss sitting together for 45 minutes and not talk about the Shopify effect.
Yeah, Shopify's creating NFTs. Anyone can create an NFT now on Shopify.
But even looking to see what are the actual applications that the limited amount of people can create on Shopify and what are they? And looking at the conversations that these retailers are having, and some of them are not just out of the gate retailers. You have mid-tiered and you have large organizations that are using Shopify and Shopify Plus to move forward. It really is a peek into that immediate near future. And I think that comes again before crypto, before NFTs, and before Web3. It's even just in looking at these applications of allowing people to connect better, to have more transparency, to do things. This isn't a perfect organization. This is a very, very large organization, but the empowerment of that relationship between the customer and the retailer and how they're redefining this idea of retail is very, very dramatic. In fact, when we talk about just what DTC did to physical retail, I think the Shopify effect has a multiple on this, because you're even seeing brands, whether it's Nike or others, doing individual product launches or specific crossovers or hybrids with other individuals or other entities as a testing ground, because of how low the barrier is to actually build and deploy on it and have all of these different add-ons and tools. I think there's a huge opportunity for retailers to just spend time sniffing around and experimenting in there to really get a perspective on what the short future looks like.
Well, I think in the context of this conversation, and to kind of like wrap this up a little bit with final thoughts from you all, is there's obviously a lot of amazing things that are sort of happening in the marketplace, both kind of near in things that are happening and brands and retailers are experimenting with. And then there's some of the more further out. Considering the audience of folks listening in right now are, people from retailers and brands. And I know this is hard to kind of sum things up here, but, knowing what we know about the marketplace and how it's changing and the consumer and the various sort of expectations they have, Is there sort of one action or piece of technology or platform that you would sort of implore our sort of audience to kind of dive into and get smarter around? And I don't know if anyone wants to jump in here first.
I'd be happy. For me, we spent a lot of time in retail talking about the experience. We had people, making frappuccinos in our stores, and we had DJs mixing tunes. And during the pandemic, what we saw is that services became the new opportunity for physical retailers and digital retailers. And my trope is that services are the new experience. And even if you are selling services on top of those services would be the way to go. And I'm talking about things like even local restaurants doing online learning classes or doing subscription models for food delivery every Sunday, and then doing a Zoom follow-up to show them how to prep it or where the food is from or the history of it. This ability for any business to create digital services on top of their physical goods is to me the most uncharted and most monetizable in the low short term to winning. And I get really excited by watching retailers who have a very high product knowledge start integrating real services within that and watching it scale at multiples. So to me, when we talk about what that win is yes, create great experiences. I'm not saying experiences are dead, but I do believe that services are really the new experience for retailers. And I hope they truly embrace it.
Anyone else have further thoughts that they want to add in?
Sure, I kind of, as personalization, we've heard a lot about it. I think it's obviously gone from a nice to have to a have to have. How you personalize across what channels, that changes. There's a lot of technologies to enable that, but I think that became very, very clear with everyone at home during COVID. I'm really excited by the future of blockchain technology, but let me be clear, it's not for necessarily crypto's sake, right? It's because of what it can do for track and trace, transparency, sustainability, and truly connecting and empowering all buyers and sellers and stakeholders across a supply chain around the world and in real time. And I think we're just at the beginning of unlocking what's possible with that. And kind of my final message for brands, retailers, consumers, everyone, just be transparent, be real, and go raw.
It'll be interesting to see how that level of transparency translates into the digital world, where anyone can be anything and represent themselves in various ways. So that trust and transparency will be an interesting one for sure. But thank you all, Mitch, Josh, Stephanie, Natasha, for spending time. I know we could keep going deeper into any of these subjects. It's been a fantastic conversation. I barely got to any of the questions on my discussion guide, which is great. And thank you to the audience for tuning in today.
This event has been curated around the findings of the latest retail innovation reports by the researchers at the Business Intelligence Service PSFK. Visit psfk.com to learn how you can download this report with a subscription to PSFK IQ, a library of 400 innovation reports and 150,000 supporting examples and data points. PSFK IQ, where innovators turn for research.
Well, I think that was super interesting, insightful, helps us think about this all-powerful, all-knowing consumer better, the Omni Consumer. So, time to change subject and talk about the on-demand brand. Again, we're going to turn to Scott. We're going to ask Scott to help us frame up what his team means by the on-demand brand. Scott.
Finally, speaking of brands, we have this idea around this third theme that we're calling the on-demand brand. And for us, this is really sort of thinking about the role that brands and companies play in consumers' lives and how they get that much more close in terms of proximity to consumers, and also find new and interesting ways to integrate themselves into the context of customers' everyday lives. And so there's a couple factors here. One is this notion of sort of anytime, anywhere availability that is being driven by new ways of sort of manufacturing, smaller warehouses closer to where consumers live, new manufacturing techniques that allow for rapid and bespoke manufacturing at scale. Alongside that, this notion of sort of rapid delivery, getting items to consumers almost instantaneously. We're seeing 15-minute grocery now being almost a new standard within the marketplace. But what happens when we even think about new forms of delivery, autonomous vehicles and the like, starting to populate? And then beyond that, we think about the sort of post-purchase probably is where we see this integration more deeply into consumers' lives taking place, when a brand is able to recognize, based on shopping behaviors, maybe even sensors on products, when things are going to be running out, being able to deliver more sort of high value services around product ownership, usage, etc. That we're starting to see relative to sort of on products, or products being treated as media channels and new touch points, throughout the supply chain, but then ultimately once it gets into a consumer's home, creating a new relationship between consumers and brands. So a lot of exciting things happening that we see within this report. We bring this to life not only with the retail truths that I touched on, but also we talk about a number of trends that we see driving this in the market today, always bringing in leading case studies to help support that and bring that to life.
Well, thanks for that research, Scott. Excited to try to understand more about the company that can turn up anytime and any place. Again, let's talk to some experts, try to understand what the implications are for today and the near future. Let's see who we have in the expert panel.
For the second session at our Future of Retail 2042 conference, we will explore the concept of the on-demand brand. On this expert panel is Duncan Bird, the Vice President of Brand Marketing and Digital at Fiverr, the online marketplace for on-demand freelance services. Also on this session is Jason Murray, the co-founder and CEO of Shipium, a supply chain platform revolutionizing e-commerce, logistics, and fulfillment. Sarah Sheffy is Senior Director of Brand Strategy at the high-end consignment fashion and accessories platform Fashion File. Helena Price Hambrecht co-founded and is the CEO of DTC Aperitif Brand House. And finally, we have Matt Alexander, a Dallas-based entrepreneur seeking to reimagine the traditional department store with his retail concept Neighborhood Goods. If you're watching live, a number of the speakers will be engaging with the audience using the interactive chat, ask questions and make comments throughout the event. Now, let's join the moderator Scott Lachut from PSFK to start this session.
Sarah, Matt, Duncan, Jason, and Helena, thank you all for joining us today and taking time to talk to us about this topic of on-demand brand. From a PSFK point of view, we kind of think about on-demand brand as all of the interesting ways that brands are getting closer to their consumers, whether that's physical proximity or finding interesting ways to kind of integrate themselves into the lives of their consumers. And, with this as the backdrop, there's obviously a lot of changes that are happening within the marketplace. There is a huge amount of competition that's happening both in a digital and physical context. As we think about sort of big opportunities for brands to kind of capture that audience, engage in new ways, add value, just as an opening question, what do you all see as sort of big opportunities for brands to kind of add value to the customers they're trying to reach? And I don't know if anyone has chomping at the bit to go first, but I can obviously call on someone if necessary as well. Duncan, I see you looking pensive in the background. Maybe I can start you off first and see if you have thoughts.
What's the question again?
Just where, as we think about sort of brands differentiating themselves and sort of adding value to the customer relationship, I wonder if there's any sort of big areas of opportunity that you see for them to kind of seize on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is changing at an incredibly rapid rate, and I think that the pandemic has accelerated change for a lot of people, and the reliance on interacting with brands in the digital space and e-commerce and things being available on demand is tremendous. And I think that the nature of work and how we all work and how we see our lives and our relationship to work has changed dramatically with the Great Resignation, and how people think about the future of work and what people's expectations from brands are. I think people's expectations are extremely high that things will arrive on time and be great value and will be frictionless. And yet we have a supply chain issue underpinning the way in which physical products are delivered versus digital products. So I think there's a lot of moving parts right now during the pandemic. And I think the brands that are ahead of consumer expectations are the ones that will succeed the most.
Helena, I wonder if you can sort of follow up on that, given the fact that much of what you as a brand are trying to do is kind of localize that supply chain and eliminate some of the challenges that maybe bigger brands that are sort of finding they have right now.
Sure. To piggyback on Duncan, the world is changing so much. And I think the real theme that I'm feeling myself, and probably others are too, is just adaptability. We've been almost 2 years now in just not knowing what the future will be. For us, House was only 6 months old when the pandemic hit. And we were a brand that was built around gathering together in real life. So we had to be really adaptable much sooner than we thought we would be. But we created the foundations of our business to be adaptable. We didn't know that we'd need it as much as we did, but we did decide to own our production, right? It's something that we knew how to do. We were good at making booze. My co-founder's been doing it for 3 generations. So we decided to own much of supply chain that other people outsource. And that allowed us to be really, really nimble, not just in the kind of products that we launched, but the cadence in which we launched them, how quickly or slowly we scaled them up, depending on how people were buying things at the time. So the decisions that we made in the beginning ended up being really, really useful to us as things changed. And I would argue we're having to do the same thing along with many companies around us, just trying to figure out what is going on, what's going to happen with consumer behavior, when or if this pandemic is going to end, how is that going to change how people buy things, how does that change how you go into omnichannel or decide to stay mostly online. These are the questions that we're constantly asking ourselves. And I do think that the more that you're thinking about it, the more you can make those really quick changes and adjust to how people are buying and behaving.
Matt, obviously you being in the world of physical retail had a lot of adapting that needed to happen over the past 2 years. I wonder if you can share your sort of point of view in terms of how you're constantly thinking about the business and sort of keeping up or ahead of the sort of things that are happening, obviously not being able to anticipate a pandemic, but the ways that your business is kind of staying ahead of that wave.
Yeah, I mean, as has already been shared, I mean, it's obviously been an incredibly interesting period. Our store in Austin was open for less than 24 hours before I made the decision to close all the stores. We opened right on schedule, on budget, on what was meant to be the first day of South by Southwest. And so, you know, the funny thing is we're reflecting on it. We're coming up on South by Southwest this year, and it will be our first, even though we've been there for 2 years. And so, you know, for us, I think the first year was very much characterized, you know, really more just 2020 as a whole was very much characterized by this sort of initial sort of reaction to the pandemic, and we started to make a lot of plans, and we planned appropriately. And I think business came back a lot bigger than we were expecting, but we weren't able to get right back into the flow of things around events and otherwise. Heading into 2021, there was this real expectation of, you know, everyone's talking about like the roaring 20s and getting vaccinated and sort of everything returning to normal. And obviously it didn't quite play out that way. There was, you know, vaccine hesitancy, there were variants, there's the supply chain issues. I think for us, being a predominantly physical business, operating restaurants and stores, as well as always trying to pride ourselves on trying to be a leader in terms of how we think about how we treat and compensate our teams. I think we found ourselves in a position where we weren't really heavily affected by labor shortages or even necessarily the supply chain crunches, although it certainly was an aspect. But we found ourselves in an interesting position there. We got to work with companies like Fashion File, and really build a lot of momentum last year. I think heading into this year, the theme for us is a little bit of an expectation of normalcy to an extent. And it's funny to say that in context of a variant surging at the moment. But I think for us, we've started to adapt our policies and procedures and sort of moments in how we react to the pandemic to be a little bit more long-term now. So it's less about a given variant. It's time to think more about, okay, what are the given thresholds in which we don't require masks of our teams versus when do we require them? We already require vaccination for anyone working in the stores and coming into the office. And now it's about just adjusting that language. So it's about being current on what will likely be a yearly regimen of some description for boosters, right? I think in Europe, they've announced that COVID passports are only going to last for about 9 months at a time. And so I think that's very much the expectation for us. So I think the funny thing is that coming out of last year, I think a lot of companies have learned a lot from a supply chain perspective. They certainly learned a lot about, through a global health crisis, the importance of treating your teams well and fostering the right environment there. And now I think how that comes to bear in 2022 is this feeling of sort of, to an extent, normalcy, right? Like shelves will be a little bit more full, they'll be a little bit more full in terms of staff to an appropriate extent. And I think in many respects, it's been this sort of overdue correction in the retail space, right? So for us, having started out trying to do things in what we thought would be, quote unquote, a better way of doing things, we've always been slightly ahead of that curve. And so we've had to be incredibly adaptable, and certainly our model allows us a lot of flexibility there, where brands, rotate in and out of our spaces. We change product all the time. We can adapt to spending habits. We can adapt to an economic climate where people are spending more or less fairly quickly. And so we've been in a good and nimble position there. How it carries us into this year, and the general expectation for us, is that yes, there's going to continue to be uncertainty, but we're starting to take a longer view around it now. And our stores are clearly not going away. We more than doubled the year prior in 2021, and we're sort of on a real sort of expansion path and otherwise now. And so I think it's very much about how we make these decisions around growth, restoring events, and otherwise, in context with maintaining caution, in context with maintaining sort of longer term views around our policy and procedure that prioritize the health and well-being of our teams. And so I think it's now about getting away from that reactionary position where everything was sort of a capital T thing in 2021, 2020, and now it's how do we make mask requirements, vaccine requirements, etc., more of a lowercase t thing.
I like that idea of moving away from reactive to sort of recognizing now the sort of changes that are happening and being able to think a little bit more strategic about how that all kind of impacts business moving forward. Jason, obviously, this has kind of come up, quite a bit. What a year or couple of years to be in the business of shipping, and businesses having to deal with all the things that have been discussed, the acceleration of digital, the disruptions within the context of the supply chain and what that all has meant. As you think about even beyond these sort of like larger shifts, and maybe these are the things, but consumers don't necessarily care about any of that. They want their products when they want them. And so as you think about some of those big challenges that companies have to deal with in order to meet that expectation from consumers, what are the sort of things that come to mind there? And then I'd be curious to hear how your model and other models in the marketplace are kind of addressing those as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of start by just leaning a little bit on what everyone else said and frame it a little different way. But the most striking thing about the last 2 years have been essentially the massive shift to e-commerce. I mean, you essentially had 15, 20 years of e-commerce ticking up 0.5%, 1% of the market share each year. And then in a matter of a year, it grew essentially the equivalent of 15 years. I mean, the numbers aren't exactly right, but basically, you know, we went from 15 to 25% of our market, of our retail being online. And, you know, I think at a high level, what you're kind of alluding to is just essentially the ability for these companies to deal with that level of scale and that level of share that's going to e-commerce. And I think, you know, when you were talking about a company it was a small percentage of their business, you could deal with it a certain way. And now that it's become a large percentage of their business or the majority of their business, you have to deal with it with an entirely different way. So kind of reframing it to your question, I think Amazon had this luxury over the years of we built everything in-house, and therefore everything was coordinated and optimized along the systems and technology that Amazon understood. And I think what you're seeing now is really the struggle of retailers to coordinate all these steps of the supply chain in an efficient and optimized way, such that you get the outcomes you want. And so I think, you know, over the next decade, looking at these various aspects of convenience, like pickup from store, deeper selection, super fast shipping, compete with Prime, all that stuff, it's going to take a new level of coordination between all the stages of the fulfillment process, and that's going to require new tech. And you know, Shipium's approach is about that. We're all about trying to essentially take all these fragmented pieces, sit on top of them, and allow us to kind of optimize each of those moving parts in tandem, which gives you a much better outcome than if they're all kind of working independently on their own agenda.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you touched on this idea of convenience, and you know, I want to direct this to you and the group in general. At a certain point, you can't get any faster or more optimized, I suppose. And so what does convenience look like kind of, you know, moving forward? Is there, how do we define it differently, I suppose? And I don't know if you have thoughts in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, just to back it up a little bit, I think there's traditionally 3 levers in retail that drive growth, right? And this isn't a surprise to anybody, but it's essentially price, selection, and convenience. And you know, I think the uber point in all of this is just that price and selection have become harder and harder to compete on, and there's a number of reasons, but it's because you know, you have every company has their own private label solution. Everyone's got marketplaces, which allows you to widen your selection in different ways. And price, you know, we've got crawlers and matchers and all the stuff that kind of dictates what things cost now. So you're left with convenience as that's your big growth lever. And I really think that over the next 10 years, that's going to be where the battle is fought. And so, you know, getting back to the specifics of your question, what does it mean to be convenience? I think it's hard for me to not just kind of reach into my Amazon playbook and just say, it kind of all ultimately comes down to what does convenience mean to the customer? And I think what we're all shooting towards is how do you define convenience from the context of the consumer? And then how do you get as close to that as possible? And so I think there's a lot of experimentation going on right now around things like buy online, pick up in store, grocery drive-through, you know, super fast shipping, faster shipping than we've had, and all those things. It's dictated by what does it mean to the consumer. And I think we've all have our own personal anecdotes around that, because you know, for me, it's not always great to wait 2 days. Sometimes I would rather drive to the store, but it's great to not have to go inside. It's great if they bring it out and it's super fast. And so I think what we're really getting to is for each of these different business models and each of the different types of item you're buying, what does it mean to be convenient? And how do you represent that digital physical experience in such a way that it matches what the consumers favor? And I think that's really what we're kind of heading for in the next 10 years. And it's exciting because I think this stuff was all kind of talked about, but it's almost like we needed this pandemic nudge to get everyone going in that direction in a positive way. And I honestly think that there's going to be a zillion different shopping modals that come out of the next 10 years. Some are going to work, some aren't, but we're going to be in a much better place in terms of what it means to be a retail consumer in the US than we were 10 years ago.
And I wonder if anyone else has a follow on to that. I mean, for me, I think convenience begins to kind of touch on levels of experience, sort of in addition, perhaps, maybe whether that's personalization or quality or what have you. But I don't know if, within your various sort of points of view, if anyone else has any thoughts on this idea of convenience and what that looks like.
Yeah, I can jump in here. When I think a lot about sort of the future of convenience for the consumer, I think, as brands and as marketers, we are really good at the pre-purchase phase of understanding the purchase criteria, matching sort of what those key decision drivers are with our value proposition, and selling a product through. And I think where there's a lot of sort of meat left on the bone and where there's a lot of opportunity is thinking through an entire sort of product life cycle and customer life cycle. We're seeing, particularly for Fashion File, because we're dealing with ultra luxury, pre-owned ultra luxury accessories. There's of course a natural sort of tailwind that we're seeing right now with this increased level of importance that consumers are placing on sustainability. We are very much interested and thinking a lot about how you take this full supply chain and full product life cycle to say, what if convenience for the consumer starts to look like curating the information that they're looking for about materiality, about responsible sourcing, about where these products are coming from and how they're made, what the overall sort of durability looks like, all the way through to what that post-usage behavior pattern might look like. We recently conducted a study, Fashion File, in partnership with Kantar Research. And we really wanted to better understand the kind of sustainability score of ultra luxury handbags. We know that because we're in the resale business, we are extending the life of luxury products, but can we put some data behind that? What can we better sort of understand about the sustainability math, if you will, of the products that we're buying and selling? And what we found that was so interesting is that, the ultra luxury customer is actually most likely to resell that product at the end of their usage of that product. So it might not come as a surprise that you won't find a Birkin bag or a Chanel handbag, which are priced sometimes in the tens of thousands of dollar price range, that they're not simply going to throw this product into a landfill, right? So what is happening? We're finding that the most likely outcome is that that customer is going to end up reselling that product. And this is more than gifting it to a friend or an associate, more so than passing it down to a next of kin. And so for us, it's really thinking through, if we know that to be true, how can we help to sort of curate that moment as well at the point in the primary market where customers are making these purchase decisions? And so convenience, in my mind, when we start to think about the future, is about saying, let's look at the sort of bookends of that product life cycle, and how can we, within the primary market, in partnering with the secondary market, how can we start to sort of frame a more holistic picture so that the customer doesn't have to go through their own sort of research and efforts in order to kind of understand and have the forethought and the information that empowers them to make decisions along that path.
Yeah, I like that idea of circularity there in terms of, thinking through in some ways you're extending the relationship with an existing consumer and sort of meeting needs as they sort of come up, and then perhaps opening the door to a slightly lower sort of, or an aspirational consumer, if you will, in some ways, who might not otherwise be able to sort of afford that. Just to kind of double down on that for a moment, as resale becomes more of a business model that brands are beginning to sort of bring into the fold, if you will, what are some of the best practices that they should be thinking about in terms of what's necessary to make that a great consumer experience?
So I think, brands like Fashion File, where over 20 years, we've been really focused on the fidelity of our data. And really sort of collecting this massive data where we can actually leverage it to create artificial intelligence-based models to solve for those challenges. That type of partnership is where luxury brands and retailers really win. By leveraging the technology that already exists out there with partners like Fashion File, and being able to apply scale to that in order to create these resale type programs. We've got a lot of luxury brands who, simply don't want to sell used product on their website, right? They're not interested in sort of the brand being diminished that way by having product that appears used, having product that is potentially less than the MSRP of what that model is. And so what we do at Fashion File is we partner with brands and retailers, not only to take their end-of-life products that they don't have to discount and have that product sit alongside their full price line, but at the same time, we offer a sort of trade-in and trade-up type program. So offering resale as a service where a brand can offer this program to their customers. Customer submits their item. We're on the back end as the white label partner and operational partner. So we're using all of our technology and artificial intelligence to identify, authenticate, and to value that product. We're paying that customer in that brand's store credit or gift card, and then we're selling that product as Fashion File. So we're really maintaining an integrity between that brand and the maintaining the sort of ultra luxury sort of prestige around that brand. But at the same time, we're on the back end, solving for some of those core complexities that make getting into this space really quite difficult. So I think when it comes to a everyday sort of mass product, easy to go to one of these, more standard kind of marketplace type partners or to build this program in-house. When it comes to ultra luxury, however, really recommend working with a partner who has the technology, has the fidelity and volume of data available to actually solve for the complexities, but at the same time, sort of protect the brand from any sort of associations that may not be wanted.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And Helena, I want to get you back into the conversation here. Obviously, we talked about extending the relationship with customers in various ways. I'm curious, I know that as a young brand, community has been kind of core to how you've built the brand and how you continue to sort of scale that. And, it's easier said than done. And so I wonder if you can kind of talk about some of the things that you're finding successful in terms of how you're engaging with your consumers and what other brands can kind of learn from that as well.
Yeah, to be honest with you, we never were too strategic about it per se, right? Like we knew that we were really lucky and that we were a liquor brand that was allowed to build on the internet. So that gave us opportunities that other brands in our space just didn't have. But in terms of doing something, I don't know, reinventing the wheel or anything like that, we didn't go that deep into it. It was more like, we're so lucky. We get to know who our customers are. We get to talk to them if we want to. We get to ask them what they want. We get to work with them to inform the products that we launch. We get to engage them with other members of the community. It was kind of basic stuff. So maybe it was a lucky thing that the bar was so low that we didn't have to go and try to think about how do we out community other people in our space. We just got to to stick to the basics. And it was something really refreshing and new for people who were orienting around a beverage.
And I'm curious, as you think about the sort of scale of your business, I know we've had an opportunity to sort of talk about this before, but we're in this sort of, in the startup space, we're in this sort of moment of growth at all kind of costs, so to speak. And so there's, money being poured in with sort of less expectation or growth, but not being sustainable, or not thinking about sort of all of these other sort of long-term prospects of what sort of quote unquote good business is. And so as you're sort of looking to grow the business, what are some of the tensions that you're sort of kind of dealing with? And, as you think about maybe how the industry needs to change, what are some of the things that you'd like to sort of see it do differently?
Yeah, I mean, we as a brand, we used to pay much more for growth back in 2020 than we do now. And that's a choice, right? We just didn't want to play that game that everybody else is playing. And, we grew like 900% in 2020. Did we need to do that? No, we didn't. But I think everybody in 2020 was trying to take advantage of the growth of e-com, and they were all looking around at each other to see what each other were doing. I think VC pressure had a little bit to do with it, but I think it had a lot to do with everybody just looking at everyone else and wanting to compete in a way, or wanting to be part of that experience. So we're really lucky that we were able to grow that much, but did we need to? No. And then you look at 2021, and everyone took a hit because that level of growth was unsustainable for everybody. We don't have everybody's numbers in front of us, but you could kind of see it everywhere, right? Like almost nobody was doing holiday sales in 2020. It was not cool. You don't do that. And then in 2021, you look around and everybody's having like month-long sales. Like I saw a couple of companies doing 100% off. It was pretty obvious that everybody was having to come up with new ways to grow this year, right? And that's not because every company's failing. It's just because the market changed and we didn't have 100% of the population in e-com anymore. So I think it was a really good reality check that growing isn't everything, especially when it comes at a potential cost to other things like sustainability or the customer experience. I think it was ultimately a blessing that pretty much all of e-com got that reality check this year. So in terms of, changes in the industry or changes to how companies operate today, I think for me, and we've had to learn this as well, like I'd like to just see consumer companies just stop looking what everyone else is doing. Like we have to stop looking to each other for inspiration and just simply do what is best for their customer, for that particular company. Because that answer may not look like what everyone else is doing, but that's kind of the point, right? Like the less that you look to companies around you, the more that you're going to be doing something uniquely your own. And that is going to be your value proposition and how you stand out in the industry.
I love this idea of, perhaps a little navel gazing within 2022 is not necessarily a bad thing per se. We've talked about this sort of idea of adaptability quite a bit already, but Duncan, at Fiverr, you're obviously in the sort of business of sort of offering this level of like flexibility within the way that companies can kind of tap into the workforce at large. And I'm curious, from the community standpoint of the Fiverr business model, how are you sort of amplifying that power of community within the business and helping others make sure that they're getting the most out of the service?
Sure. Just before I answer that, I just want to say, Helena, I completely agree with you. Doing your own thing, going your own way, and not trying to make incremental differences to competitors is definitely the way to go for smart businesses and smart brands. But to your question, Scott, I think community and advocacy sit at the heart of all great brands. And if you're building products and tools that a community feels it can rally behind, that serves its needs and can scale, you're halfway there. And at Fiverr, we really invest in our community. We invest in their growth. in their training, leadership, development, and their advancement, and also well-being, building their network through our grassroots organizing. Our VP of community engagement is actually a former Obama grassroots organizer and has taken what they called back then the snowflake model and brought it to the world of community organizing in tech. So we've been pioneering this approach for 11 years now, and it's given millions of people the ability to meet one of life's critical needs, the ability to earn money, feed and house their families. Freelancers and agencies doing business on our platform have collectively earned over $2 billion, and $1 billion of that was in 2020. So you can see, as a lot of the other speakers have already said, that the growth that many businesses are experiencing, the pandemic has essentially been many, many years of cumulative acceleration of what was happening anyway in the world. But, you know, we don't stop there. We've added convenient tools for learning, for money management, for advanced payments, and we run hundreds of community events each year. Pretty much every day of the year, there's a community event for someone on Fiverr, which anybody can join, particularly now, as unfortunately they can't be in person in most parts of the world. And we're a place really to empower people and to empower each other. We care enormously about equality and diversity. The diversity of our platform is phenomenal. And we don't have users on our platform. We see the people on our platform as community members. And in return, they're advocates, our passionate ambassadors. And it takes years to build a supportive community that stretches around the world. And we put a huge amount of effort into that. And we bring our community into everything that we do at Fiverr, from our marketing materials, our campaigns, our advertising, product development, and more. There are advisors, there are mentors, there are designers, and actually our developers. When I think about the marketing that we've been doing most recently, there are numerous businesses where we've partnered with them to really help them and then use that and shine that light of helping through marketing. So it's a very different way of thinking about marketing, where in the past we would take you know, actors and celebrities and try and bring things to life. We're talking about real businesses like Slim and Husky's in Nashville. It's a pizza place that they used Fiverr to build their e-commerce store and started selling drizzles and pizzas online. Prior to the pandemic, they were only a place where you met in person. And as we got to know them, we discovered that actually their place of business was much more than a pizza restaurant. It was a community hub for the people in this part of North Nashville. And we were so taken by it, we made a documentary about that part of Nashville, which was fascinating. And we donated money to a local charity to help people in that vicinity. Another business that springs to mind is Lavender, which is an online therapy company based in New York. And they had to navigate how to digitally offer their services to patients during the pandemic. And since working with Fiverr on their SEO, their new user growth has increased over 400%. I mean, I could go on and on. We have Rooted, we have a beer company, etc. So really, it's about seeing the community as front and center of everything.
I love that idea of advocacy within the context of how you were talking about the sort of growth and how you're thinking about the community and how you add value and how they kind of can then amplify that. And obviously, you know, you playing a role in sort of identifying and bringing those stories to life within the context of that as well. Matt, obviously community is something that is a big part of what it is that you're doing at Neighborhood Goods. And you know, you're as a business trying to sort of rethink the department store model in many ways. As you think about the sort of future of that business model, creating value not only for shoppers, but for the brands that sort of participate and are sold within the context of your stores, what do you see as the sort of big ways that brands or retailers need to sort of show up differently for their shoppers moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's anything fundamentally different. I think, you know, brands are being incredibly thoughtful about growth. I mean, it's everything that's been shared on this already. I mean, I think everyone is sort of jaded on receiving dozens of emails from a brand or texts or whatever it is. You have to have a more intentional relationship. And I think, the sort of mode of recent years has been to leverage sort of the quote unquote influencer community and otherwise. And ultimately what you're talking about is how you socialize and contextualize products, right? And physical stores are a great way to do so, where, for us, you've talked about convenience, you've talked about all these different pieces. Ultimately what it comes down to for us is, yes, we have to pay attention to aspects of convenience, allow for customers to dictate their own terms as to how they shop. But I think it's our responsibility to have more perspective around what we have available in the first place. So for us, we don't want to sell everything. We want to sell a very particular set of things and exert and really sort of express ourselves as sort of editors of sorts as to what we think is interesting and sort of separate the signal from the noise. And how do we localize that to a given market? And you think about how that sort of plays in for brands. We launched a CPG effort called the Marketplace in early 2021, which expanded to all of our stores, where we're sort of featuring a rotating mix of CPG brands, and that they've also sort of been featured on the menu in our restaurant. We were talking to a lot of CPG brands, and one of the things that they had really lost during the pandemic was sampling. And so a lot of them might be on the shelves at Whole Foods or whatever it is, which is great. And it's probably, very lucrative for them in many respects, or they sell directly online, whatever it is. But discovery remains really difficult. And this is the same in virtually any category at the moment, where it's easier than ever to start a brand and you can have incredible integrity and story behind that brand and product, but it's difficult to sort of vie for attention at the moment. And so for a lot of these CPG brands, those opportunities to sample and contextualize those products have been fundamentally crucial for how they grow and how they introduce themselves to new people. And they haven't been able to do it as much during the pandemic for health and safety protocol reasons, right? And so for us to introduce something that's highly curated, localized, and introduces brands in that sort of context, and then allows for us to build adjacencies and interesting ways of activating those sorts of products where, we did a Parlor Coffee was one of the brands we launched, and we did a Parlor Coffee rubbed burger on the menu at our restaurant in Austin. And some of these like non-linear ways of introducing a product to the consumer and sort of opening up some degree of inspiration around that brand and around that product. You have that in the same room as brands like Aesop and Fashion File and Tonal and Leline, and the list goes on. And that becomes a very interesting cocktail and can create something incredibly enduring and valuable for both the brands and the consumers in terms of how they think about forging memories and loyalty that really engender and foster long-term relationships between the consumer and a brand. And so I think, you can have amazing creative and content that goes into Instagram ads and to your own channels and otherwise, but ultimately it's a sales mechanism. And I think for brands these days, obviously you have to sell product. We sell product as well, but it's how you contextualize it and how you really create some of that inspiration that creates a certain degree of pride and excitement in the consumer. If you are selling them a backpack, you can buy any bag you want, but it's the one that has the particular story, the fabrics, the sustainability. It might be female founded, whatever it is. These are the sort of things that are the parts that matter to the consumer, and the sum of those parts is that feeling you have of confidence that goes into your day to day. So in context of a CPG brand, a brand like House, right? Like you're going to have that degree of confidence and excitement to share that with people coming to your house or in your restaurant or whatever it is, because you believe in the mission and the story. Same thing for Fashion File, and the list goes on, right? And so I think for brands these days, it's always been about storytelling, but you're dealing with an incredibly intelligent and incredibly thoughtful consumer who's incredibly discerning. And to sort of just try to growth hack your way into gaining growth and attention, it'll probably work for a bit, but you're building your success and your company on a house of cards, and it will fall apart. And so I think for us, where we like to play is on this very taste-driven side of the retail equation, where we don't want to sell everything. We don't want to engage in that sort of marketplace game and that race to the bottom in terms of selling everything and competing on just every pillar of what you can possibly fight on. But for all these other brands we work with, they have to find the one thing or two things that they really fundamentally care about as well, and work out how best to communicate that. And that's going to change all the time, right? And so we've talked about adaptability, we've talked about all these different pieces. But at the end of the day, I think as long as you're really driven by a North Star of having integrity in your brand and your product and doing something that you believe in and have passion about, it carries you in the right direction. And it's just about how you communicate that and instill that in your consumer.
Yeah, that's a nice point to end on. I know we could keep kind of going down the road of having this conversation as we open the door, but I love this sort of idea of intentional growth and really listening to your consumer and using them as the North Star in terms of what it is that you're trying to do as a business. And I think that's good things to keep in mind for 2022. So Sarah, Matt, Jason, Duncan, Helena, thank you all for spending time with us today. Thank you to the audience for listening in, and excited for 2022. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much to all the panelists, the experts, to the team who put this event together. I want to thank all the audience for being part of this and contributing within chat and sharing their own ideas as well. Remember, the report is available to download, and PSFK and our events brand Retail Innovation Week plan to have many more events each month throughout 2022 and beyond. So I hope you can join us at one of them. My name is Piers Fawkes. I am the founder of the PSFK and the Retail Innovation Week, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event. Bye.
This event has been curated around the findings of the latest retail innovation reports by the researchers at the business intelligence service PSFK. Visit psfk.com to learn how you can download this report with a subscription to PSFK IQ, a library of 400 innovation reports and 150,000 supporting examples and data points. PSFK IQ, where innovators turn for research.